Our services are more like conversations, often rather than sermons. So I'd love to include you in today's conversation relating to our monthly theme, exploring the power of ancient wisdom. We often say we are new thought, ancient wisdom in our messages, and today I believe you'll be inspired by a special true life story of a man who applied spiritual principles and ancient wisdom and became free within. And we hold the vision that he will be let out of prison. It's been 51 years. I think it's time. He's been in since 19 for murder. So the topic today is coming home to spirit. It's basically knowing the truth of who we are and what life is, and trusting that there is a higher power at work within us and also in the universe. And no matter our circumstances or tribulations, we shall overcome and return to peace, full self-expression, and making a difference in our lives, both for ourselves and others, because we are in this together. That's become such a popular phrase. We are all connected, and it's been proven in scientific fields. So I read the opening prayer from Creative Thought, and that was from November 30th, 2010. It was in 2009 when, actually he's a doctor of African studies. He got that in prison. Michael J. Nichols. He saw something in Creative Mind, which was a Unity publication that was actually started by a dentist who had the idea, and said this needs to be spread around. So that was his introduction, and he called a minister whose article was in there, and her name is Mary E. Mitchell. She actually is Center for Spiritual Living minister in Redding, California. And so they have been communicating for over 10 years. And she reminds him who he is when he forgets, which is what I think my friends and I do for each other. Wait a minute, you don't have to put up with that. Wait a minute, you can see this differently, however we say it. And he's delved deeply into his background, which he never paid attention to or knew about before. Talk about knowing things in history and having books to read. He's had plenty of time to read. And he's moved through many different changes in his life. There's a book that I found not too long ago, How to Let God Help You, and this is by Myrtle Fillmore. And she and her husband started Unity. These people who started New Thought, and a lot of people who've become spiritual leaders, they didn't have an easy life. In fact, what propelled them to look more deeply into how the universe works and what spirituality is was actually their grief, their anger, and things that happened to them. And as my longtime friend Teresa, who's with us on Zoom, one of her favorite phrases that I use is, life is what happens for us, not to us. And then her other one is, it's not the end of the story. So it's not the end of the story for Michael Nichols. He's still progressing and moving through time. And we see him free not only in his mind and spirit, but in his body, outside the bars. So Myrtle had a lot of books to read when she was young, and she loved nature. But as she got older, she realized that her health wasn't very good, and then she married and had 2 sons, and their health wasn't great. She actually talks a lot about eating properly. Wow, what a concept. And we hear that more and more these days. So she learned how to talk to her body, every part of her body, and in positive ways. And she told the life in her liver that it was not torpid or inert, but full of vigor and energy. She told the life in her stomach that it was not weak or inefficient, but energetic, strong, and intelligent. So we say so many times in this metaphysical New Thought tradition, change your thinking, change your life. And of course we have the Dalai Lama here as one of my bookmarks. The more we care for happiness of others, the greater our own sense of well-being. So I think he's a sweetheart. So Myrtle Fillmore said, so long as there is in your consciousness, in your subconscious mind, memory, habits of thinking, that which does not accord with truth, God, good, the only presence and power in all and through all, you will be meeting it in some form or other. You will be obliged to keep using the truth and the power of God, the power that God has given you to change your mind, to cast out the old and to establish a new order. When this is known, the cities, the people, their habits, their attainments, their wars, all of which outpicture states of mind, will be changed. So when we are aligned, so-called miracles happen. How many of you have heard about people getting together in cities and meditating and having the crime rate go down? Yes. And many, many examples of things like that. So one of my ideas is to have like a peace gathering at the beach, but I haven't done it. But years ago, my friend Ann Golomak had us go down to the beach with candles, and we prayed. I think that was perhaps the Iraq War. I'm not sure. Then this fairly new friend, Robert Abbott, he's got a PhD in international biology, or let's see, what do we say? Oh, international marine biology. And Zochi Young, who's actually from Detroit, but he's now in Ethiopia and Kenya teaching Mui, which is like using the 3,000-old Qigong techniques, Taoism, and traditional Chinese medicine, which is also referred to as TCM. Anyway, it's a 90-minute practice, and it gets you going in the flow. I'm just going to read some of it. You set an intention, and there are movements with this. You notice your breathing. You're stepping forward. You're actually moving your body in ways that emulate stepping forward, and gathering and sharing and receiving, and using intellect, creativity, and your gut instincts. Being of service, speaking your truth, accepting blessings and forgiving, accomplishing your goals, breaking free, feeling love, feeling joy, and looking at your life with this aspect. So Bud says, the 90-second mind-body practice, integrating Tai Chi and yoga to manage stress and unlock your potential. And if any of you are Kaiser members, you know you get those emails about letting go of stress, eating properly. And years ago I saw in their bookstore in Oakland all kinds of metaphysical books. I was like pleasantly surprised. So we do need to be our own advocate and pay attention and trust our instincts. In my search for ancient wisdom, this is the collection of correspondence between these two people. And Michael owns up to how he was raised. And he was actually a very smart kid, played the trombone, and he had everything going for him. But he didn't really know where he belonged, and to fit in, he had to become tough. And he got so tough that he actually ended up killing somebody. So we can see that there are people in history, such as the Apostle Paul. While he was in prison, he wrote the letters that became the New Testament. How many of you knew that? Okay. And Viktor Frankl, we know about man's search for meaning. He was in the Nazi concentration camp. Nelson Mandela, 27 years in prison. He walks out holding his warden's hand. Talk about forgiveness. Wow. And then became president of South Africa. Michael Nichols, how he got his experience, and he's still in a prison in Missouri. 51 years old, young, for those of us who've had birthdays lately and more conscious of time passing. He's gone from anger and violent behavior and gangster-type behavior. Even in the prison, he thought he had to protect himself. And he had been in prison and worked with Mary, Reverend Dr. Mary, for 4 years, and he still punched out a guard who like pissed him off. And he was trying to be calm and do that, but the guy egged him on. So he ended up in solitary confinement for a while. He had learned how to kind of entertain himself with the birds, and there are a lot of other stories in here about how he connects with nature that way, in a bird who's outside his window and later shows up in the yard. And when he used to go like this with his shirt out the window and then the bird would flap its wings, someone was feeding birds in the yard, and he thought, I wonder if that bird that I befriended at the window will show up. And so he flapped his shirt, and one of the birds went like this and started making the same sounds. So talk about connected with nature. So he noticed the big things and the small things. In the history, so we talk about ancient wisdom. Mary introduces him to ancient wisdom, and he's an avid reader. He says, hey, after all, when you have nothing else to do, you're going to read a lot. And so he researched, he loved the science of Mayan teachings, and he studied transcendentalists. So this was Emerson, Thoreau, Lisa May Alcott, and her father. Then this was in the 30s, and they had core beliefs of the physical world is the doorway to spirituality. The ultimate goodness of humanity is prevalent, so we are ultimately good. There's a unity of life. We find it in nature and in each other. Each person is his or her own best authority. And feelings and inspiration are more powerful than intellect. So you've heard people sometimes say, get out of your head, get into your feelings. And trust yourself. Take personal responsibility. So out of some of these teachings in our culture here in the United States, and Western culture we call it, there was a clockmaker named Phineas Parkhurst Quimby. Talk about a name that you can't forget. And he actually was influential with Mary Baker Eddy, Dr. Raymond Charles Barker, Emma Curtis Hopkins, who was Mary Baker Eddy's student, and then Dr. Ernest Holmes. And these people were in the late 1800s, 1920s, and then Unity came about in like 1889. And the Rick sisters studied with Emma Curtis Hopkins too. The Rick sisters created the Home of Truth. And originally the Home of Truth, they had 11 of them, even in Italy, I think, and maybe England. And the original Alameda one was on Broadway and Santa Clara, where the hotel is. And who is the Indian who visits? Swami Vivekananda. They were friends. So there's history, and not just Christianity and Jesus' teachings, which are prominent, but not alone. Emma Curtis Hopkins said, I am the creator of my good, and I am fearless in my journey. So she and others like her knew from their experience of healing and prayers for harmonious outpicturing of many kinds of dis-ease, disagreements, and life challenges, that we can choose how we think, and that affects our experience. And amazing transformation is possible. So just think for a minute, what's transformed your life? Have you had challenges? Mary Baker Eddy stayed in rooming houses. She met a wonderful man who died after 5 years. And I think she had a son, maybe he was adopted. So she experienced trials and tribulations. And then she fell on the ice and hurt herself, and that's when her moment of aha came, and she realized that we too can heal as Jesus and other people had emulated in their lives. So I want to, if you can read this book, and I talked about it in my Italian class Friday, and a couple of people wrote down the title. His writing is erudite. I mean, he has really absorbed such a huge vocabulary. he says, in 2009, I received a letter from, she says, I received a letter from Dr. Michael J. Nichols about his search for ancient wisdom and curiosity about an article I had written in Creative Thought. At that time, she was in the field of environmental restoration and also a minister. So we're all multi-dimensional here. So they started communicating, and let's see. She talked about the great mystery. Are you comforted to know that enlightenment is an ongoing process? It is true. We never reach a place where our development stops. We evolve eternally. But since we know that God is all there is, in what way do we relate to this and all of life's ups and downs? And she likens it to surfing the waves. And she calls it a path of heart. He actually also, he says, this is in 2013, my spiritual transformation began in 1998 in a prison cell at the Missouri State Prison in Jefferson City, Missouri. There are some things impossible to discuss or explain with people who have not experienced them. I told myself I'd never discuss my experience with the supernatural because the horror was too personal. For me, it was that way, hard to endure. He knew that these experiences would serve him, but he wasn't sure how. And let's see. Dear Reverend Mary, this was at the end of 2013. He's still fighting. This is 4 years after this is when he got in trouble, but he said, that which you have given me is priceless. I thank you for the time you have shared and the benefit of your thinking. One thing I've learned from you has been a supreme contribution to my education, is to see truth only and avoid extreme views, to see people being human with human emotions being expressed, sometimes positive, sometimes negative, sometimes neutral. As I write to you, I'm currently in what he calls AD-SEG, AD-SEG, also known as the Whole. I was engaged in mortal combat with an administrative pawn. Now look into your life. Did you ever want to hit somebody, or did you punch them? Anybody want to admit it? Okay. So imagine if you're in his shoes and what happened. For me, I was the one on the elementary school grounds who would punch the girl who lied and cheated. And she was my dear friend, too. Why I never got sent to the principal's office, God only knows. But I'm still kind of a mother bear when it's called for. But just imagine he's being egged on, and so he owns up to it. And he starts discovering his background as an African American, which he'd never been taught. And Shazam mentioned about having books being available where people know that they're not alone, that there's a whole history. And the African culture is a whole lot older than Europe in many ways. We haven't been studying that. So he delves into that, and he finds out that his great-great-great-great-grandmother prayed for future generations because she was abused in many ways by a slave owner. And then he has an African great-great-grandfather who did the same, and he was actually a shaman, but abused and put into slavery by Muslims in what is now Egypt. So he begins to see why he became who he became as a young man and his violent history, and understands and goes, what if everybody knew this, that we have a rich history? He's surrounded by other black men in prison. Can you imagine how his words and his teachings are influencing these people? I mean, it's wonderful. He writes, in order to become strong, meaningful, and a worthy human being, one has to eliminate that which is weak within him. Often this process is hell, but any metal only becomes strong once it has been through fire. The fire purifies. And if a prisoner can learn to incorporate these values into his daily life, he can change his perception of the world around him. And it wasn't until I let go of what I thought I was and embraced what I truly am that things began to change in my life. And A Course in Miracles talks about who are you to think of yourself in your littleness when God knows you only in your greatness? It's arrogant to think you know more than God. And then, of course, Marianne Williamson talked about our fear isn't that we have light, but it's that we're inadequate. Our fear is that our light, not our darkness, that frightens us. Who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. And Michael is a child of God, and we see his freedom. Also, I noticed my intuition, I suddenly called a couple of people when I was skiing in Tahoe. Coming down the hill, I called this fellow named Todd, who was the son of a longtime realtor friend of mine who's since passed. I hadn't talked to him in like 11 years. He answers, because every time from the road I can see his family house, and I thought he maybe still lived there. So he said, yeah, come and visit me. Well, he was paralyzed for quite a while. He was an extreme athlete going down the Colorado River in rafts. I'd seen footage of his escapades a long time ago. And so he was coming down a hill, he said about 80 miles an hour, and he went off a cliff and landed on his back. So he's open to different changes, and he's driving. He has a wheelchair. He got up and hugged me so he can walk, he can drive. But the interesting thing is, his mother was part of the adaptive ski school, and I got together with another couple, Mike, who created the sit ski for people who are paralyzed. Michael doesn't really like Todd, but I told him what happened to Todd, that they both have done snow removal, and I guess Todd wasn't very nice to him. But I'm holding out that at some point that resentment will pass. At least he knows, and he and his wife are spiritual people. They can send him peace, love, and good vibes. So just quickly look at your handout and please enjoy it. You'll see the golden rule in different faith traditions, and on the back there's a 5-step Science of Mind prayer process, and you feel free to take any of these materials out in front from Unity, Science of Mind, Institute of Noetic Sciences, and whatever else is down. Oh, the Christian Science Sentinel. And I want to close with a hymn I grew up with. It came to me this morning. The title is more or less, Brood O'er Us with Thy Sheltering Wing. So it reminded me of Michael's bird and his experience and his inspiration from the wings. Through God who gave the word of light, which swelled creation's lay, that there be light. And there was light, what chased the clouds away. 'Twas love whose finger traced aloud a bow of promise on the cloud. Thou to whose power our hope we give, free us from human strife. Fed by thy love divine we live, for love alone is life. And life most sweet as heart to heart speaks kindly when we meet and part. Go be the light, carry your beautiful smiles and your wonderful energy, greet the world, spread joy, be healed. Thank you.